Hello fellow bookworms, it's Katie. Today I'm here to bring you another book review. This time it's about Fire by Kristin Cashore. This is a companion novel to the Graceling book. It is kind of more of a prequel than an actual companion book, I would say. And it has been originally published in 2009. So in this book we meet Fire, who is named this very descriptive name after her hair, which is multiple hues of reds and oranges. She is something that is called a monster. Monsters are these super beautiful, colorful creatures that have some kind of mental power over humans, and the animal monsters use this power to lure the humans into traps so they can, you know, kill them. But there are also human monsters, but Fire is the only one of them. Fire has some mental powers. She can, you know, control minds, compel people to do things. She can read their minds in a after fashion, and she has been growing up in this northern estate, pretty reclusive. There's the threat of war because the new king, two of the lords are opposing him. The king asks Fire to come to his capital and help him with her powers. So if this summary was a little bit weird, that's because the plot is a little bit all over the place. The plot starts very strong with Fire and her powers and all the setup with the spies and the war, but it loses its drive very quickly. There's such a general lack of focus. There are so many plot lines. I mean, there's the war plotline, there's the spy plotline, and then we have Fire and her romance, and then we have Fire and her court life. All of the plot lines are without any tension and without any kind of character's motivation. Like, Fire has no motivation to do anything. It's just, the plot just kind of happens, but it doesn't really have any impact on her. And all these different storylines struggle for priority and struggle for the reader's attention, but at the same time they kind of prevent each other from being developed properly. And the result of that is that most of the plot lines feel very rushed. Then there are long stretches where nothing is happening because we wait for a revelation or a twist in another plot line. Pacing is not good. I would say the plotline that is most prevalent, that is front and center, is the romance plotline. But the weird thing about that is that the book kind of treats it as if the romance plotline was a subplot, but really it is the main plot, and it feels very ridiculous because just please, book, decide what you want to be. The plot could have been so engaging and interesting with the spies and the three different factions and the war. It's all about the romance, and the other stuff just fizzles out and is without any tension. And then there is this shoehorned in kidnapping that only serves to connect this book to the Graceling, and I don't really know why we needed that because it just comes out of nowhere. It also doesn't really change or add anything. I mean, the consequences from this kidnapping could have easily been written into the war plotline and it would have changed nothing. And then there's the end, which drags on and on and on and on forever. I mean, at this point the war is over, we all know how it's going to end. Briggan and Fire will be together, and it just takes forever to wrap up because the plot needs to go through the motions, and it just drags on and on and on. There are several twists, but they all revolve around the revelation of someone's father. Like, there are a lot of bastards running around. It's very melodramatic. Let's move on to the word building because boy. So this is kind of a high fantasy light, I would say. Like, all the rough structures of a high fantasy book would be there, of a high fantasy world would be there, but it's just very, very without any kind of complicated things in it. Everything is overly simplistic. Fire, Archer, King's City is the capital. The names are just so simple. To the political intrigue, well, that was very boring because we don't really get the motivations of the villains. Like, they don't really have any kind of motivation. There are no clever plans of the villains, no surprises. The thing with the monsters is, and that was bothering me quite a bit while I've been reading this book, is that the monsters don't make any sense in the context of this very kind of medievalish world. While reading it, I've noticed that the existence of these monsters didn't have any kind of consequence to the world. Just thinking about it for like 2 minutes posed various questions for me, like if these monsters existed in a world, there would be no lone outposts, like there would be no remote villages. Farming would be extremely difficult because monsters would constantly attack humans, so you can't really go out and do farming on your own. Humans would live in like large cities or large holdings where they can be protected by, you know, warriors or soldiers. Also, they would probably, you know, develop housing structures without any open spaces, so no open courtyards or anything, and all the things are just there in the book. These monsters didn't really impact any of the society or the development of society, and I just felt that was pretty lazy. Maybe a lack of, you know, imagination, and even with the excuse of, hey, this is just the way fantasy, but like, it's not thought through, and that was a bit annoying for me. Fire's powers just kind of waver to the need of the plot, and that just proves a lack of consistency. Then there are the men lusting after fire, which is a side effect of her powers or of her monster being. I just sat there and was thinking like, do you know that lesbians exist? And like, asexuals. The political landscape is just as the world in general, overly simplistic. Everything is just devoid of any kind of interesting conflict. It's just pretty boring. Speaking of boring, let's talk about the characters. All of the characters are pretty much one-dimensional, lacking any kind of motivation or agency. There's no growth within the characters, no arcs, not even in the main character. I mean, we have Fire, who is the beautiful monster being, then we have Archer, who's the archer who sleeps around, then we have Briggan, the military leader prince, then we have King Horny King, then we have Hannah, the child that Fire always wanted, but it's the child of her honey boo-boo, so she doesn't really have to get pregnant. About Fire, she has no fucking motivation whatsoever. Her biggest struggle is that she is too beautiful and that everyone she meets is just falling in love with her because she's just that gorgeous. She has a lot of power, but doesn't want to use it. She's constantly whining and crying and complaining about her fate of being too beautiful. And let me just say that as someone who is very far from being drop dead gorgeous. That was just so annoying to read, like honestly. And here's the thing about the romance and the love interest, which take up such a majority of the plot and focus. It's so predictable. It reminds me a little bit of Twilight. They have barely any chemistry. She can't read his mind. He is a little bit kind to her. That's like their whole romance. And also, I instantly knew they two would fall in love. I knew it when I read the description in the back of the book. Let's talk about the writing. And, you know, just no surprise that I find the writing is just overly simplistic as well. Cashore uses simple words, weak, non-specific words. She chooses a simple sentence structure over a, you know, more complicated one. She is opting for short sentences over long sentences, and she uses simple grammatical structures. All of that is not necessarily bad, but in combination with the simplistic world, the one-dimensional characters and the boring plot, it just, you know, it all adds up. The story is told in a third-person narrative, sometimes with touches of camera-style narrative. Camera-style narrative is basically just description what the camera in the room would see without any mentions of the inner workings of the people that are shown. There were punctuation mistakes where there were no commas, where there clearly should have been some. There were some weird mistakes in the continuity. For example, after Fire gets kidnapped and she escapes, obviously, she suddenly realizes at one time that she has a bow with her, when there was absolutely no mention of this whatsoever, that she grabbed the bow before she escaped, and then about a page after that, when she suddenly needed a knife, a knife magically appeared and she suddenly realized that she has a knife, when that also wasn't mentioned beforehand. And just things like that is just a little bit aggravating for someone like me who is just an analytical reader. And then obviously the repetitiveness. I mean, come on, you don't need to repeat things that you just told me 2 pages ago. It's a YA book, but young adults have brains and they can think, you know? So overall, concluding thoughts about this book. It's a very melodramatic and ridiculous book. It reminded me from the plot of a soap opera. There's just everyone sleeps with everyone and all the twists are revolving around someone realizing who their true father is. Something that bothered me personally is the sexual power dynamics, because all of the sexual power is given to the men. The women are basically the men's playthings. I believe that Cashore, you know, as with Graceling, wanted to make this some kind of feminist book, but she utterly failed at that. There is one paragraph where Fire thinks to herself that because she's a monster, she doesn't want to have children, because then there would be more monsters like her, like dangerous monsters in the world. So she asks herself what all her beauty and sex is for when she can't have babies, and basically what is a woman for if she can't have babies. And it's just implying that the sole purpose of a woman is, you know, bearing children, and that is not a very feminist mindset. Listen, you guys, every once in a while I just crave a trashy YA fantasy, and I just, you know, enjoyed reading it for what it was. I knew it was very bad. I knew I could read it in like 3 days. I knew that I did not have to think about anything what I just read, because everything was spelled out for me. But the quality of this book is not good. You guys, it's not good. So that was it for today. Basically, enjoy the book. Bad quality. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read this book, I mean, it's very popular, so if you've read this book, please let me know what you thought about it. And other than that, I hope you're having a wonderful day, reading something magical, wonderful, and I will see you soon. Bye!